Okay, let's talk a bit more about gain staging. Okay, so the other week I did a part 1 video on gain staging, and this video is a continuation of that one. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'll put a card up here on the screen so you guys can check out that video first. Okay, so gain staging is very important, and I already did a long intro to the other video discussing the basic concepts behind gain staging and the importance of gain staging. So if you want to see that, check out the other video first, please. But otherwise, I'm not going to go over that again, so I'll just jump into it here and start with the next concept that I wanted to discuss for gain staging. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to discuss, like so many things gain staging, could also fall under the category of analog versus digital. So the basic thing to keep in mind is that the digital noise floor is low. Basically, back in the old days when engineers were working on tape, they wanted to record their audio signal in as hot as possible without pushing it to distortion, unless they wanted the distortion. But okay, I'm not going to complicate this by talking about that right now. So some engineers, especially those that learned audio engineering back during the tape era, will still recommend that you record as hot as possible without pushing to distortion. They had to do this because they had to work harder to keep the ratio of desired signal to that of the undesired signal, in other words, the noise, as high as possible. So this ratio is called the signal-to-noise ratio, and a good signal-to-noise ratio used to be a lot harder to achieve before the development of high-quality digital audio, because in analog, the tape itself introduces a lot of noise. And to imagine this, if you're around my age or older, you might be able to remember using a cassette player to record songs that you sang or off the radio. So each time you added another track of tape, you might have noticed the noise hiss creeping up in your mix. You could take 2 tape tracks and record them to 1, but that noise level would creep up, and it was significant enough to easily notice. That noise was from the actual tape itself. With our high bit depths nowadays, we have a significant amount of dynamic range. Plus, most of our digital systems nowadays introduce almost no noise on their own. So we say they have such a low noise floor that you do not have to worry about noise creeping up into your mix at each stage of the signal chain. We battle room noise nowadays and sometimes electrical noise, which is a different thing entirely, but we don't have to worry about our digital systems themselves introducing noise the way tape consistently did, at least not when they're set up properly. Okay, so another concept that I wanted to discuss for gain staging is to know what you're metering. So a good thing to do is to make sure that you familiarize yourself with your metering options within your DAW. There are a lot of different metering options out there, and what your options are will depend a bit on your DAW and your gear. So for example, in Pro Tools, you can go to Setup and open up the Preferences window, and then you should be able to find a section on meters and metering. So in this section, you can select options like whether the peak hold or clip indication lasts for 3 seconds or forever or won't happen at all. The peak hold option controls how long your peak or the highest value will persist in displaying on the meters after it occurs. So you can pick details like that, and you can also pick things like whether to display your meters in the Sends view. And a little more critical to gain staging, in my mind at least, is if you go to the Options menu in Pro Tools, you can select whether to display pre-fader metering or not. Basically, this means that if pre-fader metering is on, you will see what is arriving at the track before any adjustments to the channel fader. If pre-fader metering is off, then you're in post-fader metering, which means that you will see the levels as they leave the track after the fader adjustments. So logically, for proper gain staging, it's a good idea to have pre-fader metering on while you're tracking so that you can see where the levels are that you're actually recording. And I've actually seen students forget to put their pre-fader metering on and then lower the fader on their track in Pro Tools significantly so that they don't see their clipping. And since they're new to audio, they either don't notice or don't understand why they're getting so much distortion. So a lot of engineers will recommend having pre-fader metering on for the tracking process just so that you can see what you're recording. For mixing, however, we want to see how our fader adjustments are affecting the mix and the sound, so it's a good idea to then turn off pre-fader metering for that stage. But I think I might have a more in-depth video about pre-fader metering, so I'm just going to put a card up here on the screen for you guys for that video. Cool. So another thing that you can do under the Options menu in Pro Tools is you can select whether or not you have low latency monitoring. And again, how you access these metering options and what options you have will depend on your DAW and what gear you're using. So the big takeaway here is to figure out how to control your metering options and then be aware of how you are metering and what that means. Once you understand what you're looking at, you can then monitor your audio more properly and you can better understand and do better gain staging. And I mean, besides all these little metering options, we also have different basic types of metering systems, and it's good to know which type of metering system you're viewing. So, I mean, for example, it's good to understand the dBFS and the dBu units of measurement that we discussed in the part 1 gain staging episode the other week. I won't get into a lot of detail about these right now because we discussed it in some detail in the part 1 episode, but it's good to understand that there are dozens of other metering options out there. Metering ballistics describes the way, which includes the speed with which, a meter will respond to the audio that it's measuring. So two of the most common metering ballistics are RMS and various types of peak metering. Basically, RMS stands for root mean square, which might sound familiar to you from math class back in the day, and it gives us a more average output level calculated over a short period of time. So it's more similar to old school VU meters, which have a slower response that gives you accurate measurements for sounds with a more continuous duration, but they aren't as good for transient metering. RMS metering is also more similar to the way that we hear. Peak metering, however, tracks absolute energy. So which one you choose to use is mostly just a matter of preference. And I have not gone into a super deep dive on this topic for myself, to be honest, but what I have gotten into using are third-party plugins where the sole function is to work as varying types of meters. So I'll put a link to some of these in the description below. I usually use metering plugins on my master fader, and actually my session templates pretty much all have metering plugins preloaded on the master fader. I think all my templates do. So you might have noticed that in last week's video on templates and Pro Tools, and maybe I should make a shorty video on metering plugins at some point. So let me know if you think that's a good idea. Just let me know in the comments below. Okay, and the last topic that I wanted to mention here is the most basic concept, and it's to start at the beginning. So when we talk about gain staging and signal flow in our signal chain, it's sometimes easy to overlook mentioning this for a beginner, so I wanted to mention it here. All of this discussion of gain and signal flow assumes that you are starting at the beginning of the signal flow and getting good gain settings starting there. It's just like with a physical chain. So our audio signal chain is really only as strong as the weakest link within it. If your levels are off at the beginning of your chain, it's going to affect every segment of the chain after that. So in practical terms, this means that if you're recording vocals, for example, and your performer is not performing at a level close to the loudness you want, or they're too far from the mic, or the mic preamp gain is too low, it's going to be a lot harder to fix that later in the signal flow, and it's going to be a lot easier to just boost the gain on the preamp, or ask them to project a bit more, or ask them to get a little closer to the mic. Like, a lot easier. So first things first, make sure to properly set the levels for your sound source first and then move along your signal flow. So performer to microphone to preamp, sometimes then to outboard gear to your DAW, then within your DAW through any plugins and aux tracks you might be routed to, any outboard gear for the mix stage, ultimately to your master fader, and then out to your speakers. It's different for every studio, but just follow the flow, whatever that is for your setup. Anyway, that's it for today. So I hope you guys liked this video. So as always, please let me know what you think in the comments below. For today's question, I want to know if you would like to see more videos about using specific plugins. So for example, a video on the metering plugins that I sometimes use. So please leave your answers in the comments below. So thanks guys. As usual, if you like this video, please tell your friends about my channel, watch my other videos, or check out my Patreon. I'll be coming out with new videos every Wednesday, and thanks for watching. Okay, let's see. What's fun today? Oh, so this shirt I actually won in an arm wrestling competition years ago. I've had it for years. I think there's like some food oil stains on here, but it's really soft and I love it and it's super comfy, and I won it at an arm wrestling competition. So take that. I think it was at Warped Tour. It was like years ago, but I love it.